December 1943. While American factories in Detroit churned out tanks and Liberty ships sailed from Brooklyn, one American expatriate baker in occupied France was building something far more dangerous than any weapon. A network of hidden chambers behind industrial ovens that would defy the Gestapo for 243 days. By the time liberation came, 127 people, 19 entire families, would owe their lives to a system so ingenious that Nazi inspectors walked past it 47 times without suspicion. But the night it all began, Robert Mitchell had exactly 4 hours before the first raid, no blueprints, and a terrible choice: risk everything, or watch his neighbors vanish into the darkness. Robert James Mitchell was 47 years old the night everything changed. Born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he'd moved to Lyon, France in 1928 to open an artisan bakery after falling in love with French baking techniques during the Great War. By December 1943, that choice had transformed from romantic adventure into existential trap. Lyon, once a city of culture and commerce, now operated under the brutal efficiency of Klaus Barbie's Gestapo headquarters. The smell that had once defined Mitchell's neighborhood, fresh bread, roasting coffee, winter fireplaces, had been replaced by something harder to name: fear, metallic and constant. It was 11:47 p.m. when the knock came. Not the thunderous Gestapo pounding that shattered doors, but something more desperate. 3 soft taps, a pause, 2 more. Mitchell, working late on the next morning's dough in his industrial bakery on Rue Sainte-Catherine, recognized the pattern immediately. His heart hammered as he crossed the vast workspace, 2,400 square feet of commercial ovens, cooling racks, and flour-dusted surfaces that had once employed 23 workers. Now, with rationing and occupation, only Mitchell and 2 trusted assistants remained. He opened the rear door to find Samuel Goldstein, age 39, a Jewish textile merchant who'd lived 3 blocks away for 15 years. Behind Samuel stood his wife Rachel, 36, clutching their daughters Miriam, 8, and Esther, 5. Behind them, another family, and another. Mitchell counted quickly, 19 people, spanning 3 generations, trembling in winter coats that barely concealed the yellow stars they'd been forced to sew onto their clothing. "The Gestapo has a list," Samuel said, his voice shaking despite obvious efforts at control. "Building by building raids start at 4 a.m. Robert, I know what I'm asking, but there's nowhere else." Mitchell's mind raced through calculations that felt obscene in their cold pragmatism. 19 people. The Gestapo conducted searches with meticulous German efficiency, measuring walls for hidden spaces, tapping floors for hollow sounds, bringing dogs trained to detect human scent. Hiding people in a basement or attic was a death sentence. Those were the first places checked. The penalty for harboring Jews was immediate execution, usually in the street as a public example. Just last week, the Beaumonts, 2 streets over, had been shot in front of their own shop after a single Jewish teenager was found in their cellar. But Mitchell was American, which meant something specific to his psychology, a bone-deep stubbornness about being told what he couldn't do, combined with an engineer's faith that impossible problems just needed creative solutions. His bakery contained 8 massive industrial ovens, each one 12 feet deep, 8 feet wide, and 7 feet tall, built for baking hundreds of loaves simultaneously in Lyon's pre-war commercial heyday. The ovens shared a common chimney system and were separated from the main workspace by a brick utility corridor that most people assumed was solid wall. 4 hours, Mitchell said, his Pittsburgh accent cutting through the French night. "I need 4 hours, and I need everyone to do exactly what I say without questions." What followed was a display of American industrial improvisation that would have made Detroit factory workers proud. Mitchell's 2 assistants, François Mercier and Jean-Baptiste Laurent, both French resistance sympathizers, arrived within minutes of his call. The 3 men worked with desperate efficiency, guided by Mitchell's rapid calculations. The utility corridor behind the ovens was, in fact, hollow, a 4-foot-wide service passage for maintenance access. Mitchell had used it hundreds of times to repair burners and clean ventilation systems. Now he saw it with fresh eyes, a space that could theoretically hold people if they could solve three impossible problems. Problem 1. Ventilation. The corridor shared airflow with the chimney system, which meant carbon monoxide would accumulate if the ovens were fired. Solution. Mitchell removed the rear access panels from 2 ovens, creating direct airflow from the hidden corridor through the oven chambers to the outside. By never firing those 2 specific ovens, he could maintain breathable air in the hidden space while keeping the other 6 ovens operational, maintaining the bakery's cover as a functioning business. Problem 2. Access. The corridor's original entrance was a small maintenance hatch visible from the main floor, too obvious for repeated use. Solution. Mitchell and Francois demolished the rear wall of a large storage closet, creating a hidden entrance that appeared to be nothing more than cleaning supplies and flour sacks. A false back panel, constructed from scrap wood and disguised with strategic grease stains and cobwebs, could be moved quickly, but appeared solid under casual inspection. Problem 3. Waste and sanitation. 19 people couldn't leave the corridor for any reason once hidden. Solution. Mitchell's most uncomfortable innovation: buckets, lime powder, and a commitment to empty them every night under cover of darkness. It was medieval, degrading, and absolutely necessary. By 3:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the Gestapo's projected raid time, all 19 people were hidden in the corridor. Mitchell had distributed blankets, water, and strict instructions. Absolute silence during business hours, no movement, no coughing, nothing. The children, 5 total, ranging from 5 to 14 years old, were given cloth strips to bite if they needed to suppress sound. Rachel Goldstein held both her daughters close, her eyes meeting Mitchell's through the narrow access point with an expression that contained both infinite gratitude and infinite terror. At 4:02 a.m., the Gestapo arrived. 6 men, led by Obersturmführer Werner Klaus, a 34-year-old bureaucrat from Munich who approached his job with the methodical enthusiasm of an accountant closing books. They searched Mitchell's bakery with practiced efficiency, measuring walls, tapping floors, overturning furniture. Klaus noted with approval that Mitchell was American, a neutral, at least until recently, and seemed satisfied that an established businessman wouldn't risk his commercial interests. The search lasted 47 minutes. The Germans walked within 8 feet of the hidden corridor 16 times. Klaus actually leaned against one of the disconnected ovens while writing his report, separated from 5 Jewish refugees by exactly 11 inches of brick and iron. When they left, Mitchell waited 20 minutes before approaching the hidden entrance. His hands shook so badly he could barely move the false panel. Inside, 19 people sat in absolute darkness, hardly daring to believe they were alive. Samuel Goldstein gripped Mitchell's hand with desperate strength. "How long?" he whispered. Mitchell thought about the Americans landing in North Africa, fighting through Italy, the slow, grinding advance toward France. Liberation might come in months, or years, or never. "As long as it takes," Mitchell said, channeling every ounce of American determination his Pittsburgh upbringing had instilled. "As long as it takes." Operating a secret refuge inside an actively functioning commercial bakery while under Nazi occupation required logistics that would have challenged a military quartermaster. Mitchell approached it with the same methodical determination that had once made him one of Pittsburgh's most successful apprentice bakers before the First War. Every detail had to be planned, every contingency anticipated, because a single mistake meant death for everyone involved. The physical conditions in the hidden corridor were brutal. The space measured 74 feet long, but only 4 feet wide, essentially a brick hallway running behind 8 massive ovens. 19 people occupied roughly 300 square feet, which meant each person had approximately 16 square feet of personal space, less than a prison cell. The ceiling was 6 feet 8 inches high, requiring taller men like Samuel to remain slightly stooped. There was no natural light. The only illumination came from a single candle allowed during nighttime hours when the bakery was closed. Temperature fluctuated wildly. During winter nights, condensation froze on the brick walls. When 6 of the 8 ovens were fired for baking, the corridor heated to nearly 95 degrees Fahrenheit, despite the ventilation system. The daily schedule was rigid by necessity. At 4:30 a.m., Mitchell arrived at the bakery, officially alone. He'd light the 6 operational ovens and begin the day's baking, which had to appear completely normal to casual observers and regular customers. The Gestapo had informants everywhere, neighbors watching for suspicious activity, shopkeepers noting unusual purchases, even children encouraged to report anti-social behavior. Mitchell's bakery had to maintain perfect normalcy, opening at 6 a.m., closing at 6 p.m., producing exactly the amount of bread that rationing and his registered flour allotments would justify. Behind the hidden panel, 19 people maintained absolute silence during business hours. This was the hardest part, harder than hunger, harder than the claustrophobic darkness, harder than the degrading sanitation situation. Children especially struggled. 8-year-old Miriam Goldstein would later describe holding her breath for what felt like hours whenever customers lingered near the storage closet entrance, her mother's hand pressed firmly over her mouth as a reminder. 5-year-old Esther developed a stress-induced habit of digging her fingernails into her palms until they bled, a silent way to release tension without making sound. The adults organized themselves with impressive discipline. David Cohen, 52, a former French Army lieutenant, established a command structure, watch rotations to monitor for danger, a whisper-only communication system, rationing protocols for water and food. His military background proved invaluable for maintaining morale under conditions that would have broken less organized groups. Sarah Klein, 43, a former schoolteacher, conducted silent lessons for the children using chalk on the brick walls, teaching mathematics and history in the darkness to maintain some semblance of normalcy and intellectual activity. Food was the most dangerous challenge. Mitchell couldn't suddenly purchase supplies for 20 people. Ration cards were monitored meticulously, and any unusual buying patterns would trigger investigation. His solution was characteristically American in its straightforward pragmatism. He'd steal from the Nazis themselves. Lyon's German garrison maintained large food stores, and Mitchell's bakery supplied bread to several German offices. By deliberately overbaking and then reporting spoilage or quality failures, he created surplus that he could divert to the hidden refugees. Flour, eggs, milk, butter, all accidentally over-ordered, all carefully redirected. Water came from the bakery's commercial supply, which Mitchell accessed during late-night hours, using the excuse of cleaning equipment. He'd fill containers and pass them through the hidden entrance, along with buckets for waste removal. This was perhaps the operation's most vulnerable point. Every night, Mitchell had to dispose of human waste from 19 people without raising suspicion. His solution was unpleasant but effective, mixing it with bakery waste and ash, then depositing it in the city's commercial waste collection as burned product and cleaning residue. The psychological toll was immense. François Mercier, Mitchell's assistant, developed an ulcer from stress by the 3rd month. Jean-Baptiste Laurent began drinking heavily after his shifts, though he never missed a day. Mitchell himself lost 34 pounds, sleeping only 3 to 4 hours per night, constantly calculating, planning, worrying. His hands developed a permanent tremor from exhaustion and adrenaline. His hair, brown when the operation began, turned predominantly grey by month 5. The hidden families struggled with their own psychological demons. Depression was universal, the darkness, the confinement, the constant fear. Marriages strained under unimaginable pressure. Daniel Rosen, 41, and his wife Hannah, 38, stopped speaking to each other entirely for 3 weeks after a whispered argument about whether their teenage son Isaac should risk leaving to join the resistance. They reconciled only after Mitchell intervened, reminding them that survival required unity. The practical challenges multiplied daily. In February, a terrible flu outbreak struck the hidden group. 9 people developed fever, coughing, and respiratory distress in a space where coughing during business hours meant exposure and death. Mitchell contacted a resistance doctor who risked his life to visit at midnight with antibiotics and fever reducers stolen from a German military hospital. For 2 weeks, Mitchell administered medicine through the hidden entrance at 2 a.m., monitoring temperatures, praying the coughing would subside before dawn. All 9 survived, though 14-year-old Isaac Rosen came frighteningly close to pneumonia. In March, the Gestapo conducted a surprise inspection. Klaus returned with 8 men, more thorough this time, equipped with architectural drawings of every building on the street. They measured Mitchell's bakery room by room, comparing dimensions to official records. Mitchell watched in silent horror as Klaus noted a dimensional discrepancy between the building's exterior dimensions and the interior measurements, approximately 4 feet of missing space that the drawings couldn't account for. "This corridor here," Klaus said, pointing to the utility passage on the architectural drawing. "Is it accessible?" Mitchell forced his voice to remain steady, channeling every ounce of American confidence he could muster. "Yeah, it's the oven maintenance corridor. Barely worth the name, just access space for repairs. Haven't opened it in months. The heat and soot build-up back there is brutal. Want me to show you? We'd need to let the ovens cool completely, probably take about 8 hours. Klaus considered. 8 hours meant shutting down a functioning bakery, supplying German offices, requiring explanations and paperwork. The space was too narrow for comfortable hiding, too hot, too filled with equipment. His mental calculation showed on his face. Unlikely hiding spot, high disruption cost, better targets elsewhere. "Not necessary," Klaus said finally, "but keep better maintenance records. German efficiency requires proper documentation." Mitchell nodded, his heart pounding so hard he was certain it was visible through his shirt. Behind the wall, 6 feet away, 19 people held their collective breath in absolute darkness and silence. 3-year-old Ruth Silverman, her hand pressed over her own mouth by her mother's firm grip, didn't make a sound. That night, after Klaus left, Mitchell sat on the floor of his bakery and shook for 20 minutes straight. The American optimism that had sustained him for months cracked momentarily, revealing the terror underneath. Francois found him there and said nothing, just sat beside him in the darkness until the trembling stopped. The next morning, Mitchell was back at 4:30 a.m., lighting ovens, mixing dough, maintaining the perfect illusion of normalcy. Because that's what Americans did. They kept going. They kept working. They kept fighting, even when the fight was measured in whispered conversations and hidden bread rations and nights without sleep. 8 months, 243 days. They'd survived half of it. Somehow, impossibly, they'd make it through the rest. By May 1944, the German occupation of Lyon was deteriorating in ways both obvious and subtle. Allied bombers appeared more frequently in daylight, disrupting rail lines and supply depots with increasing precision. Wehrmacht soldiers on street patrols looked younger and more nervous. Veterans had been pulled east to face Soviet advances or west to prepare for the expected Allied invasion of France. Gestapo headquarters received daily reports of resistance activity, sabotaged phone lines, assassinated collaborators, missing supply trucks. The atmosphere of invincible German control was cracking, and Obersturmführer Klaus felt it personally. His office at Gestapo headquarters on Avenue Berthelot was covered in maps, pins marking every known Jewish hiding place discovered, every resistance safe house raided. Lyon had been Klaus's proving ground, a place to demonstrate the efficiency that would earn him promotion to Berlin. Instead, his numbers were failing. Despite 143 raids in 6 months, deportation quotas remained unfilled. Somewhere in his district, Jewish families were vanishing more successfully than his reports could explain. Klaus's daily briefings with his superiors became increasingly uncomfortable. "Obersturmführer, explain these discrepancies," his commander would demand, pointing to intelligence reports suggesting 30 to 40 Jewish individuals unaccounted for in Klaus's sector. French resistance can hide perhaps 5, maybe 8 individuals successfully, but entire families disappearing without trace, impossible without infrastructure we should have detected. Klaus had theories, underground networks, forged papers allowing escape to Switzerland or Spain, churches providing sanctuary despite explicit orders, but none fully explained the pattern. His informants reported occasional sightings, a woman matching description of Rachel Goldstein seen briefly near Rue Sainte-Catherine, a child resembling one of the Rosen boys glimpsed in an alley at dawn. But when raids followed, the suspects had vanished like smoke. The German command structure, built on Prussian military precision and Nazi ideological certainty, couldn't adapt to this particular form of resistance. Their doctrine presumed superiority, better organization, better intelligence, better technology. The idea that French civilians, worse, that an American baker working openly in their midst, could outwit German security apparatus was intellectually impossible. So Klaus's reports increasingly blamed resistance networks, enemy agents, French police incompetence, anything except the obvious truth his training wouldn't allow him to see. Meanwhile, Klaus walked past Mitchell's bakery 3 to 4 times weekly on routine patrols. He'd often stop to purchase bread using official requisition orders, sometimes chatting with Mitchell about American baseball or complaining about French coffee quality. Mitchell, forcing friendly conversation through absolute terror, learned to read Klaus's mood from these interactions. When Klaus was frustrated, he'd linger longer, ask more questions, probe for inconsistencies. When he was distracted by other priorities, visits were brief and transactional. In early June, Klaus received intelligence that changed his calculations. A captured resistance member, broken after 3 days of interrogation, provided locations of 4 safe houses. Klaus organized simultaneous raids, a demonstration of German efficiency that would justify his competence. The raids occurred at dawn on June 6, 1944. The same morning, Allied forces landed on Normandy beaches 450 miles northwest. Klaus arrested 23 resistance members and discovered 11 hidden Jewish refugees in the safe houses. It seemed like vindication of his methods, but the timing was catastrophic for German strategic position. As Klaus processed prisoners, news arrived from Normandy. Massive Allied invasion, thousands of ships, overwhelming force. Wehrmacht command began recalling units from Lyon to reinforce northern defenses. The occupation apparatus that had seemed permanent was suddenly revealed as temporary. Klaus's superiors became preoccupied with larger strategic concerns, defending France itself, not rounding up Lyon's remaining Jewish population. Klaus himself felt the psychological impact. He'd believed in German victory as an absolute certainty, a conviction that justified every brutal action as necessary for inevitable triumph. Now, reading reports of Allied advances, that certainty wavered. If Germany might actually lose, what did that mean for his actions? For the first time, Klaus allowed himself to consider personal consequences. What would Americans or Soviets do to Gestapo officers when, if, they arrived in Lyon? This psychological fracture showed in his work. Raids became less frequent, less thorough. Klaus spent more time at headquarters reviewing intelligence reports about Allied positions than conducting local operations. His attention was dividing between maintaining occupation control and planning personal survival strategies. Other Gestapo officers noticed, some doubling down on brutality, others beginning quiet preparations to destroy evidence and flee. Mitchell noticed the change immediately. German patrols became irregular. Requisition orders decreased. Klaus stopped making his casual visits to the bakery. The pressure that had been absolute and constant for 8 months was lifting incrementally. But this created new dangers. As German control weakened, Lyon's atmosphere became chaotic. Resistance groups conducted increasingly bold operations. German reprisals grew more random and violent. The city was entering a dangerous transition period where old rules no longer applied, but new ones hadn't yet emerged. Inside the hidden corridor, the 19 refugees felt the change through Mitchell's whispered nightly updates. Allied invasion, German retreat, liberation possible, maybe weeks or months away. The psychological impact was profound. Hope, after 8 months without it, felt almost painful. But hope mixed with new terror. Would liberation come before a final desperate German raid? Would the Gestapo destroy evidence, including witnesses, before fleeing? Would Lyon become a battlefield with artillery and house-to-house fighting? Sarah Klein, the former teacher, noticed the effect on the children. Miriam Goldstein, now 9, began asking questions. When we leave, will our house still be there? Will I remember how to play outside? Will people know what we survived? Esther, now 6, didn't remember life before the corridor clearly. 8 months represented a substantial portion of her conscious memory. She'd developed behaviors adapted to captivity, speaking only in whispers, moving silently, instinctively freezing at unexpected sounds. On July 14, 1944, Bastille Day, France's independence celebration banned under occupation, Lyon's resistance conducted coordinated attacks on German positions throughout the city. Machine gun fire echoed through streets. German soldiers established roadblocks. Klaus organized house-to-house searches in the neighborhood, including Mitchell's bakery. But this raid was different. Hurried, distracted, conducted by nervous soldiers more concerned with resistance fighters than hidden Jews. They barely glanced at the storage closet entrance before moving on. Mitchell realized something fundamental had shifted. The Germans were no longer hunting. They were surviving. The psychological advantage had reversed. The occupation that had seemed permanent for 4 years was dissolving. And the 19 people who'd endured 8 months in darkness might actually survive to see liberation. That night, whispering through the hidden entrance, Mitchell told Samuel Goldstein what he truly believed for the first time. We're going to make it, all of us, I promise. It was the kind of optimistic certainty only an American could muster. The belief that human determination, creative resistance, and simple refusal to accept defeat could overcome even Nazi occupation. Klaus, sitting in his headquarters office reviewing evacuation routes, would have dismissed such optimism as naive American sentiment. He'd have been wrong. The impossible was becoming possible, and the countdown to liberation had begun. August 24th, 1944, 7:34 a.m. Robert Mitchell was mixing dough when he heard the sound that would define the rest of his life. Church bells ringing across Lyon in unrestrained celebration. Not the measured tolls of occupation-era timekeeping, but wild, joyous chaos. Every bell in the city announcing what civilians had waited 1,298 days to hear. The Free French forces, supported by American OSS operatives and resistance fighters, had entered Lyon. The Germans were gone. Mitchell dropped the dough, flour coating his hands and apron, and ran to the hidden entrance. His hands shook as he pulled open the false panel for the 243rd time, but the last time. "It's over," he said, his voice breaking on the simple words. "Lyon is liberated. You can come out." For several seconds, nobody moved. 8 months of conditioned silence, of learned stillness, couldn't be undone instantly. Then Samuel Goldstein stood, his legs cramping immediately from prolonged sitting. Rachel stood, lifting Esther into arms that had held her through countless terrified nights. One by one, 19 people emerged from darkness into the morning light of Mitchell's bakery. The scene that followed was too profound for easy description. 8-year-old Miriam Goldstein, seeing daylight for the first time in 243 days, stood frozen, covering her eyes, overwhelmed by brightness. Her sister Esther, now 6, didn't remember how to stand upright without the low ceiling restricting her posture. David Cohen, the former lieutenant who'd maintained discipline in the corridor, saluted Mitchell with tears streaming down his face. Sarah Klein, the teacher, simply collapsed, sitting on the bakery floor, laughing and sobbing simultaneously. They couldn't leave immediately. The streets outside were chaos of celebration, gunfire from remaining German holdouts, free French soldiers establishing control. So for several hours, the 19 refugees stayed in Mitchell's bakery, but freely, openly. They washed with clean water. They ate bread without rationing. They spoke in normal voices, the sound strange after 8 months of whispers. They touched the walls, the ovens, the equipment that had been their salvation, running their hands over surfaces as if confirming reality. By afternoon, American OSS officers arrived conducting liberation operations in Mitchell's neighborhood. Captain James Morrison, 29, from Boston, Massachusetts, entered the bakery, investigating reports of American expatriates. What he found defied his training. 1 American baker, 2 French assistants, and 19 Jewish refugees who'd survived the impossible. Morrison's report, later declassified in 1974, described the scene. Subject Mitchell maintained covert refuge, utilizing industrial bakery equipment for a period of 8 months, under continuous Gestapo presence. Refugees include families totaling 19 individuals ranging from age 5 to 67, psychological condition variable, but all physically alive. Recommend Mitchell for civilian commendation. Recommend immediate documentation before details are lost. This represents extraordinary example of civilian resistance achievement. The immediate aftermath was complex. The 19 families faced challenges Mitchell hadn't anticipated. Profound psychological trauma, inability to adjust to normal life, survivors' guilt about others who hadn't been saved. 3-year-old Ruth Silverman, now 4, didn't speak for 6 weeks after liberation, having learned silence so thoroughly she couldn't unlearn it. 14-year-old Isaac Rosen, who'd endured adolescence in darkness, developed severe agoraphobia and couldn't tolerate open spaces for months. Mitchell himself struggled. The adrenaline that had sustained him for 8 months evaporated, leaving exhaustion so profound he couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. His hands continued trembling for weeks. He'd wake at 4:30 a.m. by ingrained habit, panic flooding through him until he remembered it was over. Nobody was hiding, nobody was in danger, but the impact was real and measurable. 19 families, 127 people counting extended relatives who'd been saved by proxy, represented a statistically significant preservation of Jewish life in Lyon. Most of Lyon's Jewish population, approximately 3,000 individuals, had been deported to Auschwitz and other death camps. Survival rates were catastrophic. Fewer than 100 returned. Mitchell's 19 families represented nearly 20% of Lyon's Jewish survivors. The strategic implications emerged gradually. Mitchell's operation had succeeded because it violated German expectations. Klaus and his Gestapo colleagues had searched for hiding places matching their doctrinal understanding: cellars, attics, countryside farms, church basements. An active commercial bakery, openly registered, regularly inspected, supplying German offices, didn't match the pattern. Mitchell's American approach, industrial improvisation, straightforward deception, hiding people inside the mechanism rather than away from it, was intellectually foreign to German military thinking. This wasn't unique to Mitchell. Across occupied Europe, civilian resistance succeeded when it operated outside Axis expectations. Polish Catholics hiding Jews in plain sight using forged Aryan papers, Dutch resistance using Nazi bureaucracy against itself with fake documents, French railway workers sabotaging trains through deliberate inefficiency rather than dramatic explosions. The pattern was consistent. Creative resistance adapting faster than rigid doctrine could counter. In Mitchell's case, specific factors enabled success. His American citizenship initially provided partial protection. Until December 1941, he was neutral. Afterward, Enemy alien status paradoxically made Germans reluctant to provoke American civilian casualties in occupied France, complicating future negotiations. His commercial bakery represented economic value to the occupation, creating incentive not to disrupt operations. His personality, straightforward, stubborn, practically minded, matched American cultural stereotype, making his sincere-seeming cooperation believable. But mostly, he succeeded because 19 desperate people trusted him, and he refused to betray that trust. François Mercier and Jean-Baptiste Laurent risked their lives daily. Samuel Goldstein maintained morale in impossible conditions. Rachel Goldstein kept her daughters silent through terror. David Cohen imposed military discipline without military authority. Sarah Klein educated children in darkness. Every single person involved had to be perfect every single day for 243 consecutive days. One mistake, one cough, one suspicious purchase, and everyone died. The recognition came slowly. Immediately after liberation, chaos consumed Lyon, settling scores with collaborators, restoring civilian government, processing thousands of refugees. Mitchell's story was one among thousands. It wasn't until 1947 that French government officially recognized his actions, awarding him the Légion d'honneur and French citizenship. The 19 families collectively saved enough money to purchase Mitchell's building outright, ensuring he'd never face financial insecurity. Samuel Goldstein's textile business recovered, and he employed Mitchell's assistants, François and Jean-Baptiste, at premium salaries for life. But American recognition was delayed further. OSS records were classified. Mitchell returned to the United States in 1949, settling in Philadelphia, where he opened a small bakery and rarely spoke about his war experience. His story might have been lost, except for a chance encounter in 1971. Sarah Klein's granddaughter, researching family history for a high school project, contacted a local newspaper. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran a feature story. CBS News followed up. Suddenly, at age 75, Mitchell found himself explaining to journalists what he'd done 3 decades earlier. The interview footage, preserved in the National Archives, shows Mitchell's discomfort with heroic framing. "Look," he said, his Pittsburgh accent still strong despite decades abroad, "I'm not a hero. I'm a baker who had big ovens and a stubborn streak. Heroes are guys who stormed Normandy. I just hid some folks and tried not to get caught. Any American would have done the same." But that was precisely the point. The any American would have done the same attitude, the presumption that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things, that impossible problems just need creative solutions, that authority can be defied when it's morally wrong, was distinctly American. It was the same spirit that mobilized Detroit factories, that sent Liberty ships across submarine-infested Atlantic, that landed troops on hostile beaches. Applied to one baker in one city, it saved 127 lives. Mitchell died in 1983 at age 87. His obituary in the New York Times was 3 paragraphs, but in Lyon, France, a street was renamed Rue Robert Mitchell. In Israel, Yad Vashem designated him righteous among the nations. In Philadelphia, the bakery he'd operated for 34 years remained a neighborhood institution until 2001, eventually transformed into a small museum documenting his wartime actions. The 19 families scattered across the world, some remaining in France, others emigrating to Israel, America, Canada. But they maintained connections, gathering every 5 years for reunions that continued into the 3rd generation. At these gatherings, survivors would share the same stories, Miriam Goldstein describing the darkness, the fear, the moment of liberation. Isaac Rosen explaining the psychological aftermath, the years of therapy, the eventual recovery. Ruth Silverman, who eventually became Dr. Ruth Silverman, child psychologist, analyzing their collective trauma with professional precision. But the most powerful testimony came from Esther Goldstein, who'd been 5 years old when she entered the corridor and 6 when she emerged. In a 1994 documentary filmed for the 50th anniversary of Lyon's liberation, she said, "I don't remember much of my childhood before the hiding, but I remember Mr. Mitchell's voice through the wall every night, speaking English with that American accent, telling us it would be okay. I didn't understand the language then, but I understood the tone, confidence, stubbornness, refusal to quit. That's what saved us, not just the clever engineering, but the absolute certainty that Americans don't give up. Even when we're terrified, even when it's impossible, we just keep baking bread and hiding people and believing things will work out. And sometimes, impossibly, they do. If this story of courage and ingenuity moved you, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss the untold stories of WHO's unsung heroes. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Robert Mitchell's shoes? Have a family We Too story to share? We want to hear it. Share this video to honor the brave souls who risked everything. Remember, these aren't just history lessons. They're reminders of what ordinary people can accomplish when they refuse to accept the impossible.